The morning of December 26, 2014 began for the staff of the DoubleTree Hotel in Portland, just like any other. In the height of the holiday season, the conveniently located hotel, situated across from a large shopping mall, hardly had a single vacant room. Guests were constantly arriving and departing. It was during this busy time that a member of the staff discovered the body of a young woman on a staircase. She was dressed inappropriately for the season, had no identification on her, and at first glance it appeared that the poor girl might have accidentally fallen down the stairs. But only at first glance. As detectives began piecing together the fragments of this unusual case, they made a series of disturbing discoveries. They would have to confront 3 potential suspects: a mysterious two-faced guest, and a victim hiding a dark secret. 24-year-old Ashley Benson had always seemed like a very happy person. Until the age of 13, she lived in Montana with her mother and then moved in with her father, Michael, and her stepmother, Jody, in a suburb of Portland, Oregon. She had a wonderful relationship with her father and soon came to genuinely love her stepmother as well. The move was a major change in the girl's life, but it proved to be a positive one. In Portland, Ashley truly blossomed. She spent a lot of time with her family, loved being outdoors, and made many friends at school. Her friends adored her for her easygoing nature, infectious laughter, and kindness. One of her friends later recalled that Ashley was the kind of person who would give you the shirt off her back. But at the age of 17, her life changed dramatically. She gave birth to a son, Marlon. The boy was named after his father, Ashley's boyfriend, whom she had been dating for 2 years. Despite their young age, Ashley and Marlon tried to raise the child together. At first, things went well, but in 2008, after graduating from high school, they moved in together. Once the young family was on its own, life became difficult. Ashley had always wanted to pursue a college education, but she was forced to give up that dream so they could support themselves financially. Unfortunately, the young parents were unable to cope with the challenges, and they eventually broke up. Her son remained living with Ashley. The situation the young woman found herself in was extremely difficult, but she managed to cope. She found a place to live for herself and her son, took on any side jobs she could find, and slowly began to get back on her feet. For the next several years, she devoted herself entirely to her son, but she was still very young and must have felt that something was missing from her life. And so, before long, Marcus Giles appeared in her life. Ashley and Marcus began dating and moved in together in Vancouver, Washington. At first, Ashley's family was glad to hear that a young man had entered her life, but they soon began to notice changes in her. Once very open and candid, she now preferred to keep the details of her new relationship to a minimum. As a result, her family only heard rumors that deeply concerned them. Marcus did everything he could to keep Ashley spending time with him rather than with her family and friends. He wouldn't let her use the car, even though Ashley was the one paying for it, along with all the bills and rent. In other words, he lived at her expense while telling her how to live her life. Naturally, Ashley's father and stepmother tried to address the issue during the rare times they saw her, but there was little they could do. She was an adult. In reality, things were far worse, and Ashley's parents only learned the truth in September 2013 when a terrified Ashley called her father. Through her tears, she screamed at Michael that Marcus had attacked her, that she was trapped in the bathroom and couldn't get out. Michael called Marcus and threatened him with physical harm if he didn't let his daughter go. Immediately after speaking with him, Michael contacted the police and rushed to Vancouver himself. By the time Michael arrived, Ashley and her son had already managed to escape the apartment through a window, but it was now clear to him that his daughter was suffering from abuse in her relationship. She had scratches on her face, a bruise under her eye, and a split lip. Ashley agreed to temporarily move out of the apartment, but soon everything returned to the way it had been, and she went back to living with Marcus. Her family tried to persuade her to at least take a break from him, and at times it seemed she might consider it. But months went by, and nothing changed. By then, the decisions Ashley was making had begun to worry Marlon's father. He went to court over custody of the boy, and the judge ruled in his favor. At the same time, Ashley's family worried that there were aspects of her life they didn't know about. Unfortunately, their intuition proved to be correct. Christmas 2014 arrived. Ashley's son was spending time with Marlon and his family, while Ashley herself went to give gifts to her own family. Marcus drove her, but he stayed in the car and didn't even step inside her parents' house. Ashley seemed to be in good spirits, but she couldn't stay long. Explaining that she and Marcus planned to watch a movie with a few friends and have a quiet evening, she left. The rest of the holiday day passed for Ashley's family as usual. Little did they know they would have reason to worry about her the next morning when they received a call from Marcus. The young man told them that he couldn't reach Ashley. Michael and Jody knew that Ashley had a habit of letting her phone completely run out of battery. She also never kept track of time. Usually, she would call back within a few hours as if nothing had happened. They were confident this was just one of those cases, but they still tried calling their daughter, attempting to get in touch with her. As time passed, however, their concern grew, and then, at that very moment, they received a call. This call not only shattered their familiar world, but also explained why they had always felt that Ashley was hiding something from them. While Michael and Jody were consumed by growing anxiety, just a few kilometers away, the staff at the DoubleTree Hotel in Portland were facing a crisis of a different kind. The morning had begun as usual for the busy holiday season, but then everything suddenly changed. Around 11 a.m., a hotel employee discovered a body on the 8th floor stairwell. Just beyond the door, he saw a young woman lying motionless on the floor. It was immediately clear that nothing could be done to help her. When detectives arrived, they quickly noticed that the woman was dressed very inappropriately for the cold winter weather. She wore dark pants and a white blouse. She had no coat or jacket, and not even shoes or socks. There was no handbag, phone, or identification with her either. Investigators therefore assumed she had been a hotel guest and that her belongings were likely still in her room. She showed no visible injuries except for marks on her neck, indicating she had not fallen down the stairs but had likely been strangled. This suspicion would soon be confirmed. Another striking detail was her nails. The victim had clearly had a bright manicure for the holidays, but almost all the nails on her left hand were broken, and the left index fingernail was completely missing. However, none of the nails were found near her. From this, the police could infer that they were dealing with a murder and that the victim had fiercely struggled with her attacker, but the killing had not taken place on the stairwell. After speaking with the hotel staff, however, the investigation stalled. No one could recall the victim. As far as they knew, no one matching her description had checked in or out. It also emerged that a new video surveillance system was being installed in the building, and the cameras were not yet operational. This meant the police would have to work the old-fashioned way, without the help of video footage. With no other options, officers began going door to door, checking the hotel rooms one by one and speaking with guests. It was a massive and difficult task. The hotel was nearly full for the holiday, and they had 10 floors to cover. They started with the rooms closest to the 8th floor, reasoning that the killer would likely want to move the body as little as possible to avoid drawing attention from witnesses. Most guests used the elevator, but someone from the staff could have used the stairs. Fortunately, the officers didn't have to check every room in the hotel. The front desk staff recalled that a woman had been calling all morning, asking about a friend. She knew her friend was in room 715 with a man named Chris. The officers asked the staff to check the registration log and discovered that a certain Chris Yoon had stayed in room 715. Chris Yoon had reserved the room for December 26th, but he had arrived a day earlier and asked if he could check in sooner. This was allowed. The man paid in cash and left before the body was found, simply leaving the keys at the front desk rather than officially checking out. Here, an interesting legal complication arose. Because the man had left the room on his own, the police couldn't obtain a search warrant in his name. Once he had departed, the room became public property. Fortunately, the hotel chose to cooperate fully with the police and allowed them to search the room. The room was relatively clean. Only 2 socks and a pizza box in the trash remained. However, while the forensic team was photographing the scene, they made a chilling discovery: a piece of acrylic nail, the same type as on the unidentified victim. Investigators were now certain they were moving in the right direction. With their suspicions growing, the police focused on Chris Yoon and learned that he lived in an apartment complex in Bellevue, Washington. At the same time, officers investigated whether any calls had been made from room 715 and came across another lead. Calls had been made to a number listed in an advertisement on the classified site Backpage. That site often featured ads from women offering escort services, and this particular ad was one of them. The woman called herself Veronica, Foxy Veronica. The photos attached to the post matched the victim found on the stairwell. It was unlikely that this was her real name, but she wouldn't remain an unidentified victim for long. The floor-by-floor search had paid off. Behind the ice cream vending machine, officers found a purse, and inside were documents with a photo of the victim and the name Ashley Renee Benson. Detectives shared the news with Ashley's family. They were utterly devastated. They had to face not only the death of their daughter, but also the fact that she had been living a double life. The family had worried about her relationship with Marcus, but it turned out that the difficulties in her life were far greater. They couldn't understand why she hadn't come to them with her problems. Since the daughter's secret nighttime life was entirely new to them, they could offer no explanation as to why she had ended up at the hotel. As far as they knew, she had planned to watch a movie with Marcus. They did, however, advise the detectives to speak with Marlon and Marcus. Marlon was immediately ruled out as a suspect. Since Ashley had been killed on Christmas Day, he had spent the day with his family and could prove it. At the same time, he knew that Ashley had provided escort services. That was why he had fought her for custody of their son, and the judge had ruled in his favor. The judge reasoned that if Ashley could not make responsible decisions for herself, she could not do so for her young son. At the same time, the judge had seen that Ashley was intelligent, pleasant, and a loving mother, and had tried to reach her, explaining that such a lifestyle often leads to negative consequences. How right she was. On the other hand, it was clear why the family's suspicions fell on Marcus. He had mistreated Ashley, and they suspected he controlled many aspects of her life. Investigators learned that Marcus had prior police encounters, including assault charges. His alibi was not as strong as Marlon's. According to him, after dropping Ashley off at the hotel, he had spent some time at home playing video games, but no one could verify this. Still, it seemed likely that he had not been near the hotel at the time of the crime. But detectives barely had time to process the new information when they received yet another lead, an unbelievable one. They were called by the hotel. Chris Yoon had just checked in again. When the detectives arrived, the man was exiting the elevator. They detained him. He didn't understand what was happening but agreed to go to the station. However, as soon as they began questioning him, the detectives quickly realized something was off. He seemed genuinely stunned that the police thought he was involved in the murder. He didn't know any Ashley Benson, and, most importantly, he hadn't been anywhere near the hotel prior to that day, December 26th. Again, since everyone else in the country had been celebrating Christmas until then, he had a number of witnesses, family and friends, who could confirm that he had been at home in Bellevue, Washington. He also had plenty of photographs supporting his story and insisted that the police take his fingerprints and DNA. Chris explained that he was a DJ and had come to Portland for work, along with his fiancée. They had booked the room for December 26th, 2 months in advance. The investigators were stunned. Everything had pointed to him as the killer, yet Chris Yoon clearly could not have been in 2 places at once. Or could he? Detectives were already realizing that they would have to release their main suspect when one of them had a sudden insight. He asked the man if, by any chance, he knew someone with the same name. Chris quickly replied no, but then paused and thought. In fact, there was another Chris Yoon living in the same apartment building in Bellevue. The 2 men were not related. Moreover, their last names were spelled slightly differently, but pronounced the same. The detectives could hardly believe such an incredible coincidence. They clarified further and learned that the man who had arrived in Portland on December 25th had shown a driver's license in the name of Taebum Chris Yoon. The spelling of the surname didn't match, but he calmly explained that it had been a clerical error. The hotel staff hadn't found this unusual. The man had paid in cash and gone up to his room. Even more incriminating evidence came to light when investigators found Ashley's phone. The phone's ping showed that it was still somewhere near the hotel. Police scoured the area and found it in a trash bin about a block and a half away. Inside, they discovered a large number of messages Chris had sent to Ashley. The messages revealed that Chris had been a regular client of Ashley's for several months, and on Christmas alone, he had called and messaged her a dozen times. In the period leading up to her death, tension had been building between them, partly over money and partly because Chris had become obsessed with Ashley. He pressured her to leave her line of work and be his girlfriend. Every time he met with Ashley, he gave her thousands of dollars, bought her gifts, and took her to the finest restaurants. In return, he demanded that no other men be in her life. Shortly before the murder, Chris sent her an email stating, "I will explain everything before you read my message. I will compensate you for all the time you spent on me. I am determined to pay you. Before you blame me for everything, I want you to know that you broke our agreement. You posted a new ad, and although I forgave you, I found other ads. The email made it clear that Ashley had promised Chris she would no longer post escort ads, but he discovered she had lied. Investigators were now convinced they had not only identified the person responsible for her murder, but also uncovered his motive. They hypothesized that on the night of the killing, Chris demanded that Ashley leave escort work for good. When she refused and said she no longer wanted to see him, he became enraged, strangled her, and left her body on the stairwell. Everything was beginning to fit together, but there was a clear problem. No one knew where Chris was. He wasn't at his apartment in Bellevue. He had only rented it a month earlier, and there wasn't even any furniture there. His parents had no idea where their son was. They were certain he was attending college. Meanwhile, detectives learned that very early on the morning of December 26th, Chris had tried to check into another hotel. He was sweating, and his face and neck were covered in numerous scratches. The clerk asked him what had happened, and he said that he had argued with his family and now needed a place to get away from them. The hotel did not provide a room because he wanted to pay in cash, but they called a taxi, and he checked into a different Portland hotel. When police obtained a warrant and tracked Chris's mobile phone, they arrived at this hotel, but it was too late. He had already disappeared. However, while at the hotel, he had been calling other women who provided escort services. Investigators now feared that if they didn't act quickly, they could be dealing with a second murder. Studying the man's life, detectives knew that he frequently traveled on Amtrak trains, which he used to move between Washington and Oregon. This turned out to be one of the last missing pieces that would allow them to catch him. About 2 weeks after Ashley's murder, on January 7, 2015, investigators learned that Yoon had checked into another hotel in the Portland area and had purchased a ticket to travel to Washington later that same day. The police split into 2 teams. One headed to the hotel, while the other went to the Portland Union Station train station. As they approached the hotel, detectives saw Chris Yoon exit and get into a taxi. They rushed inside and asked the clerk if he knew the driver, or better yet, if he had the driver's phone number. The clerk called the driver and asked him to discreetly report where they were headed. The detectives were stunned when they discovered that Chris Yoon was returning to the crime scene. Sitting in the car, they wondered why. Some killers like to revisit the scene of the crime to relive the emotions they felt during the murder. But most likely, he just wanted to retrieve Ashley's purse, which officers had already found. Sure enough, Chris quickly went inside and came out immediately. He got into the taxi and headed straight to the train station, where officers surrounded him. The first thing he said to them was, "How did you find me?" One particularly interesting detail, however, was what Chris revealed about Marcus. According to Chris Yoon, Marcus was not Ashley's boyfriend at all. Not only did he know about her work in escorting, he was behind it all, controlling her and forcing her both emotionally and physically to continue. While this may have seemed like Yoon trying to shift responsibility onto someone else, and in part it was, he was not the only one to make such claims to the police. Some of Ashley's friends who knew about her work were also aware of Marcus's involvement. It became clear that Ashley had fallen victim to human trafficking. Men like Marcus are often called Romeo pimps. They pretend to be boyfriends, but in reality they target vulnerable young women. Often single mothers make them fall in love and then exploit them, forcing them to earn money for them. Although such accusations are very difficult to prove, Ashley herself admitted during a custody hearing for her son, just months before her death, that the money she earned went toward covering all the bills for both her and Marcus, including their apartment and the car, the very car she had been forbidden to drive. At first, Marcus denied having anything to do with Ashley's work, but over time he changed his statements, eventually admitting who Chris Yoon was and revealing that he had driven Ashley to the hotel on the night of her murder. However, despite all of the above, there was no evidence that Marcus had participated in the killing. He treated Ashley as his property, unfortunately just like Chris Yoon, having spent thousands of dollars on her, and sometimes giving her more than $5,000 at once. Chris believed he had the right to dictate what Ashley should do. According to detectives, when he arrived at the hotel that night, even if he had not fully intended to kill her, he did not rule out the possibility. According to police theory, he either hacked into the email of the other Chris Yoon or somehow learned that he was traveling to Portland and decided to use his reserved hotel room, possibly even framing his namesake for the murder. During a search of his apartment and phone, police found evidence that he was involved in illegal drug trafficking. This explained where he had obtained the thousands of dollars he so often gave to Ashley, despite having no job, while his parents believed he was a college student. Although he initially insisted on his innocence and said he would fight the charges, he later agreed to take a plea deal. In 2017, Tae Bum Yoon, or as he preferred to call himself, Chris Yoon, pleaded guilty to first-degree involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Apparently, he faced no charges related to illegal substances, though it is unclear why. Perhaps that was part of the plea deal. The human trafficking charges against Marcus Giles were not proven in court. Ashley Benson's family filed a lawsuit against the owners of the hotel and the website where her ads had been posted. They argued that the companies had failed to operate their businesses in a way that could prevent human trafficking, which ultimately led to Ashley's death. The Department of Justice soon shut down the Backpage site, citing that it facilitated and promoted human trafficking. Unfortunately, the police discovered that whatever was happening in Ashley's life could have been going on for years. 4 years before her death, she had been involved with another man, Latrell Irvin Poston, who was later charged with human trafficking. Latrell was 21 years old when he was sentenced to nearly 25 years in prison. Detectives reported that he treated his victims as property. Like Marcus, Latrell claimed to be Ashley's boyfriend, and even after his arrest, Ashley continued to hand over the earnings from her work, though not always voluntarily. For example, according to court documents, on August 11, 2011, the man called Ashley and asked where she was. She replied that she was getting a manicure at a salon. He then began yelling, "If she doesn't put the money in my prison account, I'll beat her mother." How is it possible? She's so close to the prison and didn't bring the money. What did she feel? Ashley's father, Michael Benson, asks, what could they have said to her to make her do all these things or stay silent about it? After their daughter's murder, Michael and Jody were often contacted by other young women caught in the grip of human trafficking. They sought answers to their own questions. These girls feel like there's no way out and that at some point they'll be killed too, Jody explains. I tell them, I know you've been threatened, but our daughter didn't come to us for help, and look at what happened. This is one of those cases that leaves a conflicted feeling for several reasons. On one hand, it was an excellent example of coordinated and skillful police work. Detectives and prosecutors were able to find the killer and secure a conviction. On the other hand, it's heartbreaking that despite a loving family who genuinely cared for Ashley, worried about her, and wanted the best for her, most of the men in her life treated her like a possession to be exploited for their own purposes. It makes one wonder whether all the criminals involved in this case truly received the justice they deserved.